Tariffs, trade wars, weakening currencies. Are we seeing a collapse of the US dollar? In 2025, sweeping tariff policies under President Trump have stirred the global economy, pushed up inflation, and rattled confidence. But what does the evidence say? In this video, we examine recent economic data to see how tariffs are really affecting the US dollar, global trade, and your everyday life. In April 2025, the Trump administration implemented what's called the Liberation Day tariffs. A baseline 10% duty on imports from most countries, plus higher reciprocal rates up to 50% for nations with which the US has significant trade deficits. These tariffs extend across numerous sectors: steel, aluminum, autos, and others. Many trading partners have responded with retaliation. Economists note this is one of the most aggressive US tariff policies in over a century. At its core, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. When the government imposes one, the domestic company importing the products pays this tax at the border. These importers then face a choice: absorb the cost and reduce their profits, or pass it on. In a competitive market, businesses typically pass a significant portion of this new expense along the supply chain, first to wholesalers, then to retailers, and ultimately to the American consumer. This creates a ripple effect that travels from the shipping port directly to the price tag on the store shelf. The impact of the 2025 tariffs is most visible on everyday items. Consumer electronics, a sector heavily reliant on components from abroad, have seen noticeable price hikes. The same is true for apparel, footwear, and household furniture. These are not just luxury goods, but staples in many American homes. Economic models from the Budget Lab quantify this impact. They estimate these policies have directly contributed to a short-term increase in the overall price level, a measure of average prices, by approximately 2.3%. This isn't an abstract number, it's a direct erosion of your money's value. This translates to a significant loss of purchasing power. When all 2025 tariff policies are factored in, the analysis projects an annual loss for the typical US household, equivalent to about $3,800 in 2024 dollars. That's over $300 a month that families no longer have for groceries, savings, or other essentials. Crucially, this financial burden is not distributed equally. Lower-income households are hit proportionally harder, as a larger share of their budget is spent on essential goods, the very categories most impacted by tariffs. Beyond the individual household, the tariffs cast a shadow over the entire US economy. Projections show a slowdown in real GDP growth, with tariffs expected to reduce growth by nearly 0.9 percentage points in 2025 alone. This signifies less economic activity, potentially leading to slower job creation and reduced business investment. The long-term effects suggest a permanently smaller US economy than it would have been otherwise. The US dollar has indeed shown signs of weakening. For example, in mid-2025, the dollar lost ground versus several major currencies as trade uncertainty rises and businesses express concern. However, this isn't a collapse. The dollar remains the world's primary reserve currency, widely used for international trade and finance. Key drivers of dollar weakening: 1. Tariff-driven inflation making US assets less attractive. 2. Uncertainty in policy which lowers investor confidence. 3. Global trade disruptions causing businesses to reconsider supply chains. Studies show many US firms are feeling rising costs and reduced demand. China's exports to the US have dropped sharply in some sectors due to the tariffs, but overall, China is seeking other markets. For example, they are exporting more to Europe, Asia, and diversifying. China's economy is also showing signs of slowing: weaker industrial output, softer retail sales. Tariffs plus internal challenges, consumer behavior, property sector, are contributing. But China is not winning in the sense of escaping the costs. Its manufacturing sectors face stress, and policymakers are looking to stimulus measures. So the outcome is mixed. The most immediate risk remains inflation. The IMF consistently notes that tariffs act as a direct tax, with costs passed down the supply chain. When import costs for materials like steel or electronics rise, consumers ultimately pay more. Projections for 2025 suggest sustained tariffs could add nearly half a percentage point to the annual inflation rate. This complicates efforts to maintain price stability and directly impacts the cost of living, affecting everything from cars to household appliances. US manufacturers also face a dual threat. While tariffs aim to protect them, they simultaneously raise the cost of imported components, squeezing profit margins. A company building machinery, for instance, pays more for foreign parts, making their final product less competitive globally. This is compounded by retaliatory tariffs from other nations, which shrink export markets for American goods. The resulting uncertainty stifles investment and hiring, as businesses hesitate to commit to long-term plans in a volatile policy environment. The legal and political foundations of the tariffs are also under pressure. Hundreds of businesses have challenged the tariffs in the US Court of International Trade, arguing the administration overstepped its authority. A significant ruling could force policy reversals and billions in refunds. Furthermore, the entire framework is politically sensitive. A change in administration could trigger a rapid overhaul of trade policy, creating more whiplash for industries that have already spent years adapting to the current landscape. So what's next? International trade talks are ongoing, but the issues are more complex than ever. Recent meetings between US and Chinese officials now cover not just tariffs, but national security, technology like TikTok, and intellectual property. While a comprehensive deal seems distant, analysts expect possible targeted easing on certain goods to de-escalate tensions. The focus is on careful negotiation and managing the relationship, signaling a shift from broad confrontation to a more nuanced strategy of de-risking. Finally, the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency isn't under immediate threat. Its dominance is secured by the vast US economy and deep financial markets. However, persistent trade disruptions encourage other nations to explore alternatives, a slow process known as de-dollarization. This isn't a sudden collapse, but a gradual erosion of confidence over decades. It's a long-term risk that policymakers are carefully monitoring, as the stability of the global financial system hangs in the balance. As we assess the economic landscape of 2025, the renewed tariffs have moved from policy papers to tangible reality. The costs are no longer theoretical, they are real and measurable. We're seeing persistent inflationary pressure, with prices for imported consumer goods like electronics and apparel up by an average of 8%. This directly translates to a loss of purchasing power for American families. On a macroeconomic scale, economists estimate a drag on annual GDP growth of around 0.3%, a significant headwind. The US dollar, while far from collapsing, has certainly felt the pressure, softening against a basket of Asian currencies and making imports more expensive. Meanwhile, China is not standing still. Faced with these barriers, Beijing has accelerated its dual circulation strategy, boosting domestic demand while forging new trade alliances in Southeast Asia and Africa. They are feeling the heat, but they are also proving highly adaptive. So is this a full-blown economic disaster? The answer is complex. For certain sectors, the effects are undeniably damaging. American manufacturers who rely on specialized components from China now face higher costs and unpredictable supply chains. Yet to call this a simple win for China would be a misreading of the situation. The trade war has exacerbated their own internal economic challenges, from a precarious property market to high youth unemployment. The pressure has forced a painful economic restructuring away from total export reliance. Similarly, fears of a dollar collapse have proven overblown. The dollar's deep-rooted role as the world's primary reserve currency creates incredible inertia. While some countries are exploring alternatives, a seismic shift away from the dollar remains a distant prospect, not an immediate reality. Ultimately, the long-term outcome isn't written in stone. What matters most is how policymakers respond now. Will they seek de-escalation through targeted negotiations and a return to multilateral frameworks? Or will we see an escalation with broader tariffs that risk a cycle of retaliation from other economies? The path forward hinges on whether confidence in the predictability of US economic policy can be restored. Global markets thrive on certainty, something that has been in short supply. This brings us to the central debate, and I want to know your thoughts. Is there a viable path for a trade policy that protects critical US industries and national security without inflicting this collateral damage on consumers and allied relationships? Or are these goals fundamentally at odds in our modern globalized world? Let me know in the comments.